Now we go on to the new Rockstars Thunderbolts breakdown, Easter eggs, and details you've missed. This is a spoiler-heavy video now, so if you ain't ready for spoilers, please exit, but don't exit. Alright, let's go.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and this is an in-depth breakdown of everything you missed in Marvel Studios' Thunderbolts! As my favorite Marvel movie since Avengers Endgame, I've now seen it 4 times, and I've combed through every scene and found so many interesting details, Easter eggs, connections, and visual themes that collectively make this movie really great, and I am pumped to share with you what I found. And while I'm so grateful that you watch these New Rockstars videos, really the best way to support what we do here is to grab something from our merch store, NerdRiot.shop, like one of our Thunderbolts designs. The opening Marvel Studios title card jumps right into the flashing comic book images on the surfaces of the rotating Marvel letters as usual, but quickly they are overtaken by shadow, which also silences the sounds of Michael Giacchino's Marvel Studios theme until we're left in silence with a monochromatic dark version of the studio logo, visually foreshadowing the threat the Void will inflict in this story. But before we even get to that, if you look closely, the flashing comic images that we see that typically show Captain America, Iron Man, and others now show only Sentry Comics from a number of issues since its comic debut in 2000. There's the short-haired Ryan Topper Sentry from the recent Jason Liu series, which ended in May 2024. I think actually this is the most recently published Sentry Comics released by Marvel Comics by the time this film was released. There's the retro Golden Age design of Sentry from the 2009 The Age of Sentry run by Jeff Parker and Paul Tobin, which explores Sentry in an alternate universe. There's this image of one of the times Bob Reynolds' Sentry battles the Void, and most of the other images show the best-known Bob Reynolds version of Sentry from the past 25 years. And we see the bottom of this page from 2006's Sentry number 5 by Paul Jenkins, art by John Romita Jr., the panel where Dr. Worth tells Robert, "You're not going to shoot me, Robert. You're not going to hurt anyone because secretly you want to do good. Give me the gun." And then Bob rips himself into a Sentry and Void form as he screams, "You're tearing me apart!" So Sentry was created in September 2000 by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, who wanted to create Marvel's Superman, but not in terms of values, rather just power set. And they chose to introduce him in an interesting way, as a man struggling with addiction and mental health, who didn't even realize he had superpowers. Rick Veitch, who co-developed the character, had the idea to market his introduction as a meta figure who had supposedly been part of Marvel's comics history from the beginning, from the 1940s Golden Age, and then existed in all the eras through the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby Silver Age. Due to some cataclysmic event, everyone in the universe forgot about Sentry's existence, including Bob himself. So he suddenly flashes back to memories of being a superhero named Sentry, who had taken a super soldier serum 1,000 times more potent than the one given to Steve Rogers that gave him the power of 1 million exploding suns. He could manipulate reality, use telepathy, fly, go toe-to-toe with pretty much every Marvel character, including Hulk, Galactus's Herald Terrax, Doctor Doom. Spider-Man recalls that Sentry fought Galactus to a stalemate, and then most famously, he rips Ares in half. Sentry also shares his consciousness with a dark malevolent entity called the Void. So this movie, reinserting Sentry's comics history in place of the normal comic images on the studio logo, is a reference to this in-universe retcon that happened in the comics. The idea in the comics is that Sentry is supposed to have existed in our universe since the beginning. It's not that his watchtower gets built on top of Avengers Tower, it's the opposite. Avengers Tower got constructed over the site the watchtower was, and just no one knew it was there. And I just like that the opening sections of the movie pay tribute to the way Sentry was introduced in the comics. Now the Void has a similar, supposedly ancient origin, speculated to be a separate entity that then latched on to Bob when he became Sentry, with roots maybe as far back as the Old Testament, like part of the plagues of Egypt. But part of Bob's struggle with the Void is that he's never quite sure if the Void is really just a symptom of his own shame or not. This movie asks the question, does that darkness we all feel come from someplace real outside of ourselves? Something that was always there before we were broken enough to feel it, making it like a cosmic shadow demon that we have to fear? Or is it an inner pain that comes from our own experiences, something we all create together, and therefore something we can unite around to get through together? And that Void is actually where we open with Yelena Belova, Florence Pugh, who returns from the 2021 Black Widow film and the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, still mourning her sister figure, Natasha Romanoff, and now working in special ops for Val. We see her tight in close-up as she closes her eyes, meditating, as her voiceover says, "There's something wrong with me, an emptiness. I thought it started when my sister died. Now it feels like something bigger, just a void." So right away, Yelena references the void that she will be battling in this movie. And she even questions whether it was caused by her grief over Natasha or if it was something bigger that was always there. Yelena sits atop the second tallest building in the world, Merdeka 118 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
I get in a breakdown of it. Of course, I did like the movie. I tell you, it had one of my favorite heroes inside it.
actually had
So now
Florence
I
be
get
on
an
top of
Easter
this
eggs.
building and had her leap off the edge with support wires, but they did swap in a stunt performer for the parachute base jump. This shot of Yelena taking this kind of leap is significant in a lot of ways. It underscores the dark thought spiral Yelena is going through, because at first, if you haven't seen the trailer, you don't know why she's jumping off a building or if she even has a parachute. Also, it recalls Natasha's deadly leap from the cliff on Vormir in Avengers Endgame, and it puts
She didn't live
Florence
through
Pugh
that.
through a real practical jump that she actually did. And it feels like a bit of redemption for the character, considering the most maligned moment for many people of Black Widow was a very VFX shot of her doing a very cringy jump. This jump is awesome. Yelena lands atop another building and takes down a guard in an Ox hat, OXE. This is the logo of Val's holding company, Ox Group. OXE was mentioned in recent comics. 2023's Thunderbolts Volume 5, Number 1 has a secretive group founded by a version of Valentina Allegra de Fontaine that gives Bucky intel that he brings to Val to form a new...
Why does she have a cockeye right here? Like, one eye going this way, the next eye going this way.
Thunderbolts team. Beyond that, there's no real history to OXE in the comics, and the company might have just been created for this movie. It seems to be taking the place of Oscorp, the weapons company of Norman Osborn, who plays Val's role as a director of the Thunderbolts in the Dark Reign era of the comics, which started around 2009, which then leads to Dark Avengers. Norman Osborn and Oscorp, of course, are Sony properties as they're in the Spider-Man orbit. Yelena fights her way through this building as director Jake Schreier stays in a smooth overhead long take, showing Yelena gracefully and deadly moving down this hall, creating a stunning visual of long shadows, which is another visual foreshadowing of The Void, how it flattens victims into long shadows just like this. This whole movie, whether or not you...
Going into this movie, I was trying to figure out how in the hell they was going to stop this. This man literally would put his hand in your direction and erase you. I don't know how they could have stopped that.
Yelena realizes
They handled
that
it
she
well,
is
though.
fighting her own void. Among Yelena's moves is the firing of her electrified Widow's Bite, the wrist projectile she inherited from Black Widow Natasha, and something we saw her use in Hawkeye. Now, the music we are hearing in this sequence and throughout the film was composed by Sun Lux, the amazing band and composer group who composed the score for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And it just plays so well against a group of characters who are going through a similar journey of being sucked into their own personal everything bagels. We realize that Yelena's opening narration is actually her talking to a bound guard from the Ox Group in this lab as she tries to access this intersection with tubes of serum that she needs to destroy under orders from Val. Our colleague Matt Pat, formerly of Game Theorist and Film Theorist, who I actually met at the Thunderbolts premiere, tweeted that this taped guard might have been him, but he was joking. This actor is credited as Matt Einhorn. He does share the first name.
He does look like him, though.
Matt Pat in the MCU. He was great in Five Nights at Freddy's. Yelena finds a guinea pig in this maze, and I wonder if this guinea pig might have been given any versions of the serum Bob received. The maze that the guinea pig has to navigate mirrors
That's
the
a
maze
fat
of
guinea
shame
pig.
rooms that they will
When
have
I
to
first saw that, I was
navigate
like,
to
what
the
the
center of Bob's
hell?
mind in the final act. Now, in the background on the far end of this room are the two frozen shadows of the first Ox Group techs that Bob/Sentry voided. They're just still there, floating behind Yelena in a lot of these opening shots. And I like how she's just so dead inside and so focused on the mission that she doesn't even comment on the spooky shit that clearly went down here. But it tells us that Bob and Project Sentry were a recent breakthrough. And now that we've seen the movie, do these two guys ever get unvoided when the crisis gets resolved at the end of the movie? Do they wake up
them
on a
niggas was
floor that's
dead.
been blown up by Yelena? Does Val's goon Holt wake up unvoided on a crashed helicopter or in the midair spot the moment he was voided? We're getting to some
Nah, he
unblip
dead too.
logic here. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. And you cost our team is Trustpilot, BetterHelp, a subscription scam. But this scientist gets his face shot off, and Val doesn't understand what happened here. That Project Sentry could bring about the end of the world. This scientist gets his face shot off in the struggle, and Yelena
He
walks
shoots
off
his
with
own
a guinea
face
pig
off.
as the floor this lab was on explodes. And according to behind-the-scenes material, this movie's production actually set off practical charges for this shot.
We shot Florence jumping off of that building in the morning and then went to another street and just blew up an entire floor of a building in the afternoon.
We move on to Washington, D.C., where, if you look closely, you can see the Capitol building, and the Washington Monument has scaffolding around it to repair.
I tweeted this earlier. The Sentry's superpower is literally depression. So yeah, forget about mental health.
Some damage, which is a fun little detail
Don't
referencing the
actually do
recent
that.
Red Hulk battle in Captain America Brave New World, which included Red
And I
Hulk
just finished
leaping
this
after
movie.
Sam Wilson from the White House and scraping part of the Washington Monument. Poor Washington Monument. Between this and Spider-Man Homecoming, it's just had a rough go, but I'm sure MJ would say it's because of this.
I don't really want to celebrate something that was built by slaves.
Bucky Barnes is now an elected congressman. Now, in Captain America Brave New World, he mentioned having a fundraiser to go to, and we found out that he was a newly elected congressman. Here, reporters talked to him about the day's hearing, and he mentions his constituents in Brooklyn. Bucky and Steve grew up in Brooklyn. Depending on how the districts are divided in the MCU, Bucky could be representing the 8th district, which in our reality is Hakeem Jeffries' district, the House Minority Leader. Really, all the Brooklyn districts lean heavily Democratic, and I would just be curious to know what kind of campaign Bucky ran. Because unlike Senate seats, which can be appointed by a state's governor, House seats are left empty until a general election or a special election happens to fill them. So Bucky definitely won an election. He could have run uncontested, but people had to mark his name on a ballot, and I just think that's awesome.
Solid B+.
He definitely
Bucky
is.
has never given any indication as recently
Not
as
a
the
good
Falcon
one.
Winter Soldier that
But
he
he
would
is.
ever want to seek public office. But since the Sokovia Accords have been repealed according to episode 8 of She-Hulk, and of course since Bucky Barnes is a veteran who fought alongside the Avengers in the Battle of Earth, I'm assuming there were some local leaders in Bucky's hometown neighborhood who urged him to run. Actor Wendell Pierce, who will also play Daily Planet editor Perry White in DC Studios Superman this summer, plays in this movie Congressman Gary, the chairman on this hearing on articles of impeachment against Val, who we learned in Black Panther Wakanda Forever is the director of the CIA in the MCU. Val corrects Congressman Gary on the pronunciation of her name. It's not Fontaine, but DeFontaine.
DeFontaine.
And mentions the Secretary of Defense as Anderson. So keeping track, the U.S. Secretary of State in the MCU is played by Toby Ziegler actor Richard Schiff, and the Secretary of Defense is this guy, Anderson. And we have 2 ex-presidents that we know of. Thaddeus.
That was also Thor inside God of War. Not Thor, that was... Am I stupid? That was also Odin.
Ross, Harrison Ford, and recently James Ritson, played by Dermot Mulroney. Val's signature hair stripe color is now silver, and she wears a white suit, white being the historic suffragette color worn by modern-day feminist politicians. Many have pointed out the visual similarity between her look and Tulsi Gabbard during her confirmation hearings in early 2025, but this scene was shot well before Gabbard was nominated to be part of Trump's administration, or before anyone knew how the 2024 election was going to play out. Gary says that before serving as the CIA director, Val chaired Ox Group, which answers some questions about why she recruited John Walker in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and recruited Yelena as a Black Widow.
is.
But it does have us wondering about her marriage with Everett
Movie was
Ross,
very
who's
good.
been part of the CIA. Like, was it a CIA connection? Did he know what group she was involved with? Did he know? Val testifies, right now there are several rogue nations with technologies that exceed our own. She's likely referring to Wakanda and potentially also Tlaloc Khan, because in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, she was definitely after the vibranium tech of those 2 kingdoms. Val also says, and you'll recall that our last president turned into a bright red superhuman monster who nearly destroyed the city. Of course, referring to the
Red
events
Hulk.
of Captain America Brave New World, when President Thaddeus Ross turned into the Red Hulk after years of manipulated blood treatments at the hands of Samuel Stearns, the leader. Val says the Avengers are not walking through that door, which Bucky reacts to as he literally just walked through this door. He too is going to have a personal arc in this movie to formally step into the role of becoming an Avenger. Val says,
The guy you saying that's the leader. That's one of the Hulk villains that crazily enough ain't fight the Hulk yet. I don't know why they're using all of the Hulk villains, not for the Hulk. This is how they ruin my character, though.
the onus is on me, on us, the American government, to shield its citizens. And she emphasizes the word shield, I think, to also imply that there once was a government organization called SHIELD that aimed to do exactly this. But since SHIELD fell due to Hydra corruption and Captain America the Winter Soldier, there really has been no government agency doing quite that function on the ground on this planet. Val says she doesn't mind at all that Congress pokes around Ox and awkwardly sips her water, and cut to shit as Val and her assistant Mel, Geraldine Viswanathan, rush to clear out the Ox facility. Val tells Mel, get rid of any hanging chads that could get me impeached or land me in prison. The hanging chads is a reference to the 2000 presidential election and recount in Florida, where hanging chads became a media buzz term as the punched out pieces of ballots that were alleged to result in counting errors that assigned some votes for Al Gore to Pat Buchanan and ended up giving George W. Bush the state that tipped the election. Red Guardian Alexei Shostakov, David Harbour, watches on TV footage an old Soviet parade. I'm a bit of a history nerd, and I actually figured out exactly what footage they used for this. It was a May 1st, 1981 Labor Day parade, or May Day parade, in Moscow's Red Square, and that's Prime Minister Leonid Brezhnev Alexei is waving behind. They inserted a young, thinner Red Guardian in this actual historical footage, Forrest Gump style, and I love it. Alexei mutters, Brezhnev, get out of my way. Now, I recapped
I was
all of
wondering
these
if that was a
characters
fake
in their
video or
numerous
not.
past MCU appearances and this recap video, but we last saw Red Guardian in the Black Widow film, where we learned he was a Soviet counterpart to Captain America in the 1980s, who then became a spy in the 1990s as part of a fake family living in Ohio with Melina, Natasha, and Yelena. And when they were exposed, they had to flee to Cuba, where the family was split up. Natasha and Yelena went to the Red Room training under Ivan Dreykov, and Alexei, years later, actually ended up in prison in Siberia until adult Natasha and Yelena busted him out.
Move your ass, super soldier.
And after helping them bring down the floating Red Room base, he now, several years later, works for a limousine driving service in the DC area, or really on the border of Baltimore. Yelena passes that red limo and reads the slogan, "Red Guardian Limo Service, protecting you from boring evening." And after thinking Yelena is a pushy DoorDash delivery person, he invites her in. And in Alexei's dumpy home, we can actually see a poster labeled Red Guardian in Cyrillic letters behind him in the doorway. We see various posters for motorcycles, which just sets up his love of Bucky's entrance later.
It's a Winter Soldier. That guy is so cool.
We see various pro-Russia art pieces on the refrigerator. We see past due bills, and we just see old Red Guardian propaganda prints, like one behind Yelena of him using a hammer to break a chain on an anvil, which is just some classic Soviet imagery. And then we see another poster of Red Guardian posed with a woman who we never really get identified, but it kind of looks like some media event or movie or video game that they were trying to promote. Alexei says he moved to DC, and Yelena asks if this is technically Baltimore. He says that Baltimore starts one block over. Hey, Alexei lives in the same city as Isaiah Bradley, and I think they should hang out. They'd get along great. Alexei observes that the light inside Yelena is dim, even by...
They didn't meet throughout this whole movie. Oh shoot! Wait, I'm so stupid. I'm putting two different movies together.
European standards. And Yelena says she feels lost and empty, but Alexei tells her that her sister Natasha understood that meant to pursue a higher calling. Yelena finds a framed photo of her youth soccer team, the Chesapeake Valley Thunderbolts, which is where they will get the team name of Thunderbolts in this movie. Apparently, this team lost every game, and we learned that there was one girl who pooped in the middle of the game. Actually, director Jake Schreier said that they really wanted to shoot that as the jokey post-credit scene as a handheld video that was shot by Alexei from the bleachers, but they realized that since it would have been in the early 90s in Ohio, Alexei would have just been using his really well-developed American accent, and it would have just sounded like David Harbour and wouldn't have been as funny when he yelled. Yelena calls Val about a more public-facing assignment, and Val gives her one last covert job: stop Ava Starr, Ghost, Hannah John Kamen, from robbing the Ox Vault buried a mile deep in the desert in Utah. Since we last saw Ava Starr in Ant-Man the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne gave her the quantum healing particles, healing her chaotic phase shifting so that she now has greater control over it and doesn't have to live in Bill Foster's energy chambers that keep her from disintegrating. Inside this base, Yelena finds a bunch of crates dragged out into this incinerator floor, including some paperwork on Project Sentry. We see 2 pages on the right showing various alternatives of the Sentry S logo. On the right, we see 12 blank heads with different haircuts, and above that, 12 heads with different colors of hair beneath a bar graph displaying various focus group testing survey results, as Val and her team have clearly been workshopping the best look for a perfect Avenger hero. On the left, we see yellow wardrobe designs of the costume that they'll settle on for Sentry, and over on the dark blueprint, we see the words "The Watchtower," which in the comics is Sentry's headquarters, and in this movie, the name of the building Val was planning on renovating Avengers Tower into. Before Yelena can read these, she's shot at by John Walker, Wyatt Russell. They fight, and John throws Yelena pretty far because he did take the super soldier serum in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. While he did have to give up the Captain America shield, he has since acquired a new shield, which you can see is super scratched up, implying a number of vicious missions since we last saw him. Taskmaster, Antonia Dreykov, played by Olga Kurylenko, attacks John, and Ava attacks Antonia. So we get a full circle of 4 targets trying to kill each other, like, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander. And it's pretty clever how Val structured it so that each killer would be most effective over
targeting someone different.
Like Ghost targets Taskmaster because although Taskmaster can replicate any attack move, Ghost would be able to phase through any surface and try to surprise her. Taskmaster is aimed at John.
Could the Taskmaster reputate? I giving myself together. Could she imitate her or take her? Yeah, because I don't know what's going on. Could she take her powers? Because I don't know. I didn't know Taskmaster could actually copy powers. I know she could copy skills and moves and stuff like that.
Because while John is juiced up with super soldier serum, if he were to face someone with parallel combat moves, he probably would get easily confused and flustered. John targets Yelena because Yelena is smallest and likely most vulnerable to John's relentless strength, and Yelena targets Ghost because while Ghost can phase shift, Yelena is most subtle and agile and probably has the best chance catching her before she would phase. Olga gets one line as Taskmaster in this movie. When she strikes John, she retracts her mask to tell Yelena, "I'm not here for you." Ghost phases into the fight and phases through John's body body to punch Taskmaster, Yelena fires her Widow's Bite at Ghost, but Ghost phases away so that the probe zips right through where she once stood and hits John behind her. Yelena pounces on Ghost, but Ghost fades away from under her, so Yelena just hits the ground. This is all just really fun to see this scramble. And the fight bumps into a crate containing what we later learn is Bob, activating it to open. I think one of my favorite moves from this fight shows the exact target chain in a single shot following a knife. Yelena flings the knife at Ghost. Ghost lets a knife go through where she once stood, but then phases back in to catch it behind her, then flings that knife at Taskmaster, who deflects it off of her shield directly at John, who catches it and then stabs the knife back down at Yelena, who can only hold him off by using the Widow's Bite to electrify his stronger arms. Ghost and Taskmaster duel, and I love how you can see Taskmaster perfectly mirroring each of Ava's strikes until Ava finally figures it out and phases to Antonia's blind spot, and blam, R.I.P. Taskmaster. You can see a single trickle of blood going down her mask. This is what
they did say, that there was going to be a big death at the beginning of the movie, and I didn't even realize that they was going to kill off Taskmaster like that. They did not put a big bullet hole in there.
Trailers of this movie hardly show Taskmaster, aside from a very clearly VFX shot of the group in Avengers Tower with Taskmaster painted in, that they didn't even bother to paint in for later trailers that they released. So Bob, Lewis Pullman, who also played the pilot Bob in Top Gun Maverick, stumbles out from behind a crate vomiting. He introduces himself.
Who are you?
I'm Bob.
Bob can't remember how he got in here and seems to have a completely wiped memory, similar to how we first meet Bob.
Lewis Pullman was a great actor for Sentry Dog. He played the role so good.
Reynolds
he played him perfectly to me, at least.
From this scene to a charity event for the First Responders Family Fund, hosted by Val, themed around the Avengers from the Battle of New York. We see banners reading "Honoring Our Heroes" with Iron Man in his Mark 7 armor from that battle, and Captain America Steve Rogers, and I think Hawkeye, and probably the other 3 Avengers who are part of that. And we see on display Loki's scepter, which would no longer contain the Mind Stone, and was recovered from Hydra after Von Strucker extracted the stone, and the Avengers did recover it in that opening battle from Age of Ultron. We also see some Chitauri guns, and Val also shows off a pair of Chitauri handcuffs, which she says came with the new property, meaning these were also left behind when Happy Hogan supposedly moved everything out of the tower in Spider-Man Homecoming. Like, he got Thor's magic belt, but did not get the Chitauri handcuffs. Now, I thought these might be the cuffs that Loki was locked into when he was arrested at the end of the 2012 Avengers movie, and when we revisited this scene in Avengers Endgame and in the Loki pilot episode. We can also see the big broken A from the word Stark when the tower was first Stark Tower, the A that was left standing at the end of that battle to inspire the tower to become Avengers Tower. Congressman Bucky chats with Mel facing that big A, and they talk about Kierkegaard, how the Danish philosopher said that life can only be understood backwards, which is true. And the full quote is, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." And it applies to what these characters will have to face going through their personal voids, facing their past.
That's such a roundabout quote. Obviously, you can't think about
shame in their dark memories by looking back upon them. Bucky proves that he does read Kierkegaard, saying he did believe it was up to individuals to create values. Back in the vault, Bob tries to run out the door, but the blast door slams down. Director Jake Schreier directed the series Beef on Netflix, and I'm reminded of the horrifying moment with the mansion panic room door that we saw in that finale episode of that season. As they try to figure out who Bob is, John gets quickly annoyed at how many times Bob says Bob, and actually, if you notice from this point on, John ends pretty much every line he says to Bob with Bob or Bobby, like, "Stop asking so many questions, Bob," and he ends up saying Bob or Bobby way more than Bob ever says his own name in this movie. John calls Ava a shield reject on the run from 15 nations. Yes, after
I've never seen Beef before.
Accident that killed her father, Elias Starr, Ava Starr was taken in by Bill Foster and made
never even heard of it
before she went rogue. John describes Taskmaster as having destroyed half of Budapest, and Yelena says, "Don't talk about that one." Yelena says this out of respect for a former fellow Widow agent who was stuck under mind control from Ivan Dreykov, but talking about anything in Budapest in the MCU kind of reminds us of this line in 2012's Avengers.
Just like Budapest all over again.
You and I remember Budapest very differently.
John claims he was the official Captain America, and Yelena's like, "Yeah, for 2 seconds." And Ava reminds us how he publicly killed an innocent man in the street, and John replies, "Define innocent." They're referring to the Flag Smasher,
I am a born
who
hater.
in episode 4 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier killed John's friend Lamar Hoskins, after which John crushed him to death with the Captain America shield, smearing it with the guy's blood, and that led to John getting dishonorably discharged and recruited by Val. John also says he has a loving wife and son, referring to his wife Olivia, whom we did meet in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but But, you know, John's shame memory later reveals that he is definitely not in a loving situation with his wife. The red lights turn on as the incinerator warms up, and they look for the power source of the frequency device that traps Ghost in this room, and they pry open the panel to defuse it, and John barges in with a shield saying, "On your left," showing that the favorite salute between the other Caps, Steve and Sam, is something that John has fanboyed out over as well.
Don't say it. Don't you say it. Left. Come on!
On your left.
Ava gets the door open at the last second, and jumping out to avoid the fire, Yelena ends up touching Bob's hand, taking her into the void for this shame memory. Violet McGraw returns to the 2021 Black Widow film as a young Yelena, a few years into her Red Room training, in some kind of test to lure out another trainee, Anya, into the snowy woods during lunchtime, and then this man comes out to shoot Anya. To be honest, I'm not really sure what the lesson was here. Don't go wandering off, or if a fellow widow gets lost, leave her behind, don't go looking for her, or is it just being in the Red Room's terrible? But the book that Anya drops reads this. This is Sni Gurushka, which refers to the snow maiden of Russian.
How the hell that spell is Sneak? It looked like Sherry Popka. Sherry Poika.
Reads this. This is Sni Gurushka, which refers to the snow maiden of Russian folklore, the granddaughter and helper of Ded Moroz, the Russian Santa Claus, or Father
Yo,
Frost.
other languages are crazy though.
As a Novi god character from Russian fairy tales, one about a peasant couple with no children, and then one day a snow sculpture miraculously came to life to become their adopted daughter, and Sni Gurushka brought so much joy to her parents, but didn't live long because she was challenged by the village children to jump over a bonfire, and she melted. Earlier in this film, Yelena dismissed fairy tales to Alexei, maybe because she feels like the Sni Gurushka who melted before she could bring real joy to anyone. Or maybe this reflects how she chose to be the goalie of the Thunderbolts soccer team, the kind of sacrificial figure who jumps on the grenade. I also enjoy how this movie sort of makes Alexei the Russian Santa Claus, dressed in red and white, with a big old beard, driving a kind of sleigh, who is even called Santa by Val later in the movie.
Who is this old Santa?
Val's plan is to use a strike team
to
take out
doing bad in that
arrest,
scene.
and it's overheard by her limo driver, Alexei, who will from here on out spend the next several hours in a very long road trip out west to Utah. Thank God he's a slob with junk food everywhere because he's gonna need that big gulp cup. John slams Bob against the wall, and for a moment,
that big gulp cup was already filled.
As the void begins to peek out, I like this detail because while the void is mostly marked by shadow, the void's eyes do emit a pale gray glow. Yelena encourages Bob, who wants to stay put even if it means his death, and she says she gets hating herself, but after a while that darkness becomes alluring and becomes, and Bob finishes, a void. And Yelena says what she does with that void is to shove it way down. Bucky reads Congressman Gary's packet, spilling a chili dog on it and on his arm. Why does Bucky eat chili dogs? I think he's remembering his great times at Coney Island with his buddy Skinny Steve, and how they probably puked out chili dogs while riding the Cyclone roller coaster. But he washes his vibranium arm in the dishwasher. Yes, he somehow got it back after Rocket and Nebula had it in the Guardians Holiday Special, and then he pops the vibranium arm back and rotates it, similar to what he does when he has to put it back on in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier after the Dora Milaje 5-point finger palm took it off. Mel calls and remembers being in high school when the Battle of New York happened. Bucky says he was like 90, and there's that age again for never aging superheroes.
Disney brought him back. They're gonna make him do this till he's 90.
Mel tells Bucky to track his phone, which I think this scene establishes to show how Bucky knows to go to the Utah desert and how he knows to drive them back to Avengers Tower in New York City. The crew gets into the elevator shaft and John tries to leap up, but
bosses it.
For a moment, he disappears into that inky darkness, and I think it's another visual example of a character just going into a void shadow. They ask Ava if she can phase shift up the walls, but she says she needs to know where she's going and can only hold it for a minute. And it's similar to the logic Alan Cummings' Nightcrawler gave when they were trapped in a base in X2.
I have to be able to see where I'm going. Otherwise, I could wind up inside a wall.
Isn't it great that we're gonna get that guy back in Avengers Doomsday? Bob proposes they inch up the shaft.
It's the same guy, I didn't know that.
And from above and below, they form the shape of an asterisk, which is just fun. Remember, Val said that this vault was a mile down, so that's gonna be a long way to inch back up. Probably about as long as it's gonna take Alexei to drive out to Utah. Mel shares with Val Bob's personnel records, and on this screen, you can actually see some interesting details. Reynolds, Robert, biography, earliest available hospital records indicate
he was on meth.
Reynolds was a victim of domestic abuse throughout his childhood. There are no records of criminal charges filed in relation to these reports. Following a car accident, Reynolds was addicted to orally administered morphine during middle school, but was able to finish 8th grade before ultimately dropping out less than a year into high school. He has a history of drug-related arrests for nonviolent crimes, including breaking and entering, larceny, and burglary. And it lists his hometown as Sarasota Springs, Florida, and we see Bob's
the Sentry from Florida. You're from Central Florida.
shot from when he would have been a teenager. I don't know many people.
That's why he's a thug.
But I can tell you, a lot of people are addicted to meth. The crew realizes they have no good way to get from their current position to the upper level.
Yeah.
Bob mutters to himself.
He literally was on meth in the movie.
This we will later see is what his mom would say to him when he would try to intervene when the dad was abusing her. John snatches Yelena's baton and makes an executive decision, pushing off, dooming all of them to die. But Yelena instinctively latches her cable to Bob, who sneezes. When Bob and John touch hands, John is taken in his shame memory. A scene that really struck me as a parent who has occasionally found myself doom scrolling while I was with my kid. John reads an article that uses a photo of John Walker from the end of the first episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier when he was first given the shield. And this article reads, "Fall of a Hero, the John Walker story. Few have fallen further from grace than the putative heir to the mantle of Captain America, John Walker. Not long ago, Walker was thrust into the public consciousness with all the fanfare Washington could muster." And we see a story by Rory Bruin, and Rory Bruin is an art director on this movie. He previously worked on Christopher Nolan's Tenet. The story of what went wrong starts long before his unveiling just a few short years ago. While no one could doubt that the boots of Steve Rogers were big ones to fill by any man's standards, Walker did seem to fit the bill, a decorated combat veteran from the Army Rangers, and then it gets cut off. When John comes out of this shame vision, he turns back to look down the deep pit of the elevator shaft as if he kind of looks ready to jump, or at least considering it for a beat too long, like Yelena's self-destructive leap that opened this movie. Bob tells him that when he was younger, he worked a summer job as a meth-addicted sign-twirling chicken, setting up the crazy moment in one of his void shame rooms. Later, Val and her commander, Holt, send in a strike team. Yelena and Bob have another private moment where he reveals he took the medical trial with Ox to try to make something better of himself, saying that he had always had these episodes since he was a kid, with a high and then a big low followed by a blank. And later we can infer that these might have started by witnessing his father's abuse, but it's just murky enough to imply that the void might have always existed in him. Yelena fights through the strike team, tying Bob to herself with a fire hose to keep him from helping. It's kind of sets up how these two will be tethered together around the neck in Bob's attic in the void later, and how at the end of the movie, Yelena just knows that because the void was never purely extracted from him, she's just gonna have to stay close to him. Yelena directs Bob's gun to fire at John.
Stop! Please, John, stop! Where are you?
They get out dressed as strike team soldiers, and when they get stopped at the checkpoint, Wyatt Russell gets the biggest laugh from me when the gate guard again orders him to identify himself, and he just goes, no. Bob creates a diversion and gets shot, but he gets back to his feet, and his medical garments are shredded, and those aren't the only thing that's shredded. I mean, damn, dude, it's only one shot in the movie, but hey, if Marvel Studios gives you some fitness trainers and puts you on a nutrition plan, you can't say no. The void creeps into Bob's eyes, and Sun Lux's strings work into a frenzy, leading Bob to blast up into the clouds.
We just doing a bunch of backflips in there.
To Earth, landing in a huge shockwave. Yelena shows John and Ava the paperwork from the lab that explains how Bob was a successful case of Project Sentry. Ava reads, the power of 1,000 exploding suns and the golden guardian of good. They actually changed it to 1,000 exploding suns instead of 1,000,000 as it is in the comics. But in the Sentry comics, newspapers do.
I didn't know that. Why would they change that? That makes no sense. Why does it even matter? Because there's literally nobody that could beat him right now.
Call him the golden guardian of good. And we also see the quote, he will stand for humanity's hope, which is a line about Sentry from New Avengers #9. In the comics, Sentry was part of the super soldier program.
That's a nerf right there.
1,000 times stronger than what Steve Rogers got. So it sounds like the Ox group was continuing the legacy of trying to use a new serum cocktail to create this government-controlled human weapon. But just because Bob Reynolds was so unstable from an early age, it amplified something very dark about him. A certain insecure darkness, a shame demon that is known as the Void. Ava asks Yelena if she knew Antonia, and Yelena says yes, she had a tough life and she killed a lot of people and then she got killed. Yelena did not have that much time getting to know Antonia Dreykov after Natasha gave Taskmaster the anti-brainwash antidote, but really, I just think Yelena was just so conditioned by the Red Room to feel hardly anything when another widow were to die. I think Natasha was really the one exception to that. Alexi's red limo pulls up.
Oh no.
This man's so stupid.
It's coming right at us.
Who is that? It's no one. Oh god.
So dumb.
Don't go in the vault! Valentina's gonna burn your life!
This nigga's so stupid.
Hearing Alexi screaming, it's your dad, it's just so wholesome, because this is what Alexi would be doing at her soccer games, making her feel even more embarrassed than Mandy, the girl who pooped on the field. Alexi compliments the team Yelena has put together, noticing that the light inside her has grown brighter. John sarcastically says, yeah, go Thunderbolts. And Alexi thinks that she genuinely named them after the Pee Wee Soccer Club. Alexi remembers that they were sponsored by Dimitri's Elite Industrial Lighting and Electrical, not Shane's Tire Shop. But I just think it's clear that Alexi's favorite business in their Ohio town was some Russian buddy of his. Alexei tells him this team has the power to be on the Wheaties box. Since Alexei was an 80s Russian hero, he likely would have been jealous of American athletes and celebrities who got to be on boxes of cereal. Then an ox convoy catches up and Alexei hits the gas, but it tops out at 54 miles per hour. And we see this limo has over 98,000 miles on it, which is way higher than a novelty ride service within a city area should have on it. Alexei activates his defensive measures, which just turn on party lights and fog, and Genuine's pony jump on it. It's similar to the gag in Thor Ragnarok when they're escaping Sakaar on the Grandmaster's pleasure yacht.
It's my birthday! It's my birthday!
Alexei swigs vodka and makes a Molotov
Yo, they
cocktail
screw over
that
the Hulk
hits
so
armored
much,
truck,
dog.
and then
I
immediately
have so
goes
much
out.
to say
So
about
Yelena
that.
has to lean out the window and shoot, and one of the armored trucks blows up and flips, but it wasn't her gun, it was Bucky!
Is that Bucky?
Actually, in my favorite interview clip ever, Florence Pugh describes the take of Wyatt Russell.
We did a take where Wyatt turned around and went, Buggy! Because he just looked so cool.
Bucky rides up, taking out these trucks with the same explosive discs that we saw him use on Nick Fury in 2014's Captain America the Winter Soldier. And the way Bucky rides up through that dust and then grabs the shotgun and he flips it around, it's totally an homage to the Terminator in the chase scene in T2 Judgment Day. Sebastian Stan even confirmed that while shooting this sequence, he was listening to the T2 soundtrack obsessively. Bucky shoots out the cable hook, lets it run, and then brakes, grabs the hook.
He was just flexing in the scene.
Punches the ground, completely flipping the truck. And I think this is one of my favorite moves I've ever seen in an MCU movie. It's so sick. And I love that even the Thunderbolts seem to recognize this from a meta awareness. They can't help but cheer. Even John Walker, who has fought alongside Bucky before.
And tell that nigga shoot their car. And boom.
Val and Mel return to the Watchtower. The existing structure of Avengers Tower is still there, even with the additional penthouse structure beyond the landing pad for the Quinjet that was added for Avengers Age of Ultron. But Ox has now built over it a new black facade that, if it were ever completed, would change its silhouette in the skyline, which makes it overall look like the comic depictions in which Sentry's hidden Watchtower was kind of enveloping Avengers Tower. Val meets with Bob and places his S belt buckle on the table. She brings up his family history and touches his hand, and then we are taken to Valentina's shame memory, the day when, as a girl in Italy, she accidentally told a man in town where she and her father lived, and then that man showed up to their home and killed her father in front of her. Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, known as the Contessa in earlier years of the comics, first appeared in 1968's Strange Tales run as a companion to Nick Fury, and we learned she was born in Italy and her parents were actually killed for aiding in some unspecified resistance movement. So I assume her father's involvement in that resistance is what got him killed in this scene, but Italy was under a fascist rule during World War II, but Valentina would not have been a kid during that point in history. She was definitely born after it. So it's not really clear why her father was killed from the scene, but I'm assuming the killer was someone outside of the law, which is why Valentina is so obsessed with world security and having the strongest weapons now. When Mel talks to Val, the necklace she's been wearing all movie really stands out in the scene. Many have likened Mel's necklace with the Songbird icon. Songbird, Melissa Gold, or Screamin' Mimi, was part of the original Thunderbolts lineup when it was created by Baron Zemo. To be clear, that's not the Thunderbolts era that this movie is focusing on. This movie, I would say, is adapting something closer to the Dark Reign era, mixed with Sentry's comic arcs, and the name Thunderbolts is really just a coincidence with it being the nickname of Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. That connection is not really drawn in this movie. Bucky restrains Alexei, Ava, Yelena, and John, and he puts Ghost in the Chitauri handcuffs that we saw earlier, clearly to keep her from phasing away.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure if these are the same ones they put on Loki, but I think they have the same alien technology that prevents teleportation out of them, since Loki is able to use sorcery tricks of like duplication casting and a similar type of teleportation. That's not exactly the same thing, but you can imagine there would be certain technology that would just keep slippery people like this restrained. Bucky realizes he has a team of heroes who actually can help stop Val in New York City after his call with Mel, and he gives a pretty great speech to get them into it.
Look, I've been where you are. The past doesn't go away, so you can either live with it forever, or you can do something about it.
Alexei has dreamed of this moment to have a true Avengers team. So they get to New York, and this city shows no signs of the police state or curfew imposed by Mayor Fisk that it's supposed to be under as of the season 1 finale of Daredevil Born Again. But I think we're finding that there is just a clearer and clearer line between Marvel Studios and Marvel Television. John, Yelena, and Ava right in the back.
What about your hat?
The hat. The helmet?
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
It's like cool, right?
Why the hell did Jimmy Kimmel just pop
Do you
up?
like the hat?
Yeah, I think the hat's pretty sweet.
Then cool.
I feel like these comments about his little hat are why John changes his headgear when they rebrand into the new Avengers in the post-credit scene. Alexei asks Bucky,
What kind of super serum did you get?
I don't know, regular. Hydra.
Oh, fancy. Mine was Soviet recreation, but it's still good, you know. We are the same, you and me. Well, I mean, we are different, but we are the same.
Remember that even though Hydra had a facility in Siberia, Hydra was technically a bigger network and a separate organization than the normal Russian government. So while the Russians, like the Americans, were all trying to recreate the super soldier serum in different and various diluted ways, Hydra had its own successful program that produced the Winter Soldier, actually the Winter Soldiers, as there were many of them. And ultimately that cocktail is what led to the batch that we saw in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Bucky's plan is to just ram this truck into the lobby of the Watchtower. When he jumps out, he rips off the car door and uses it as a shield, recreating the first time his buddy Steve used a makeshift shield in 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger. The Thunderbolts beat the crap out of these Ox guards, and I just like how right outside this on the street is the same area where the 2012 Avengers fought the Chitauri, with that same bridge level where Natasha and Steve fought in the later stages of that battle. In fact, on that bridge, we know from the Hawkeye series, is a plaque that commemorates those original 6. Val invites them up the elevator, and she pours a drink from the bar, which is the same bar set that Tony Stark had in the 2012 Avengers movie. Val says, "Isn't it crazy to think of all the monumental fights that happened?"
Yo,
exactly
she had balls, because niggas could have just shoot her right then and there.
Was right here. The Avengers fought Ultron's first form right here. And in the time heist in Endgame, the future Avengers came back to this location to steal the Tesseract and the Scepter. And speaking of that Scepter, it is back on display in the background of this room. We also see another Chitauri gun, and I might be wrong, but I think we see Coulson's Destroyer Armor prototype gun in these display cases. Val taunts them, calling John a junior varsity Captain America, and I think it takes more offense to just junior varsity because we know he played on a football team and probably was varsity. She says Bucky has survived less than half a congressional term. I suppose she assumes he's gonna die or at least have to resign. And she calls Alexis an old Santa, but really she's just trying to get them to be violent with her to incite Sentry to overreact, because she invites Bob down and he's got a new look as Sentry. And damn, it's pretty comic accurate, down to the hair. This casting was great. The golden suit he wears actually looks like it's made of the same fabric that they use on Anthony Starr as Homelander in The Boys. And I don't think that was an accident, because Sentry is the same kind of lab-grown, perfect superhero with a hair trigger mental health imbalance. Val says that he's stronger than all the Avengers rolled into one, and soon he'll be known as Earth's Mightiest Hero, taking the Avengers' classic moniker of Earth's Mightiest Heroes and making it singular. Val orders Sentry to take down this violent group of criminals, as she calls them. It leads to a big fight. Yelena tries to back out, but it's too late. Sentry throws Alexei out the window, and then he yanks him back in.
Sentry is stronger than majority of the Avengers. Like, I would say he would be stronger than everybody. If, like, to say the Hulk at his base and Thor at base, then yeah, he would be stronger than all of them. But as you can see in the last video I watched, the Hulk is stronger than him, just strength wise. And a head-to-head fight, the Hulk would beat him, but Sentry is a broken character.
Into the bar, Sentry folds John's shield into a taco. Bucky tries to stab him, and Bucky even
have
does
no
his
way to beat
signature
him.
badass move of dropping the knife from one hand to the other that we saw in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, but it fails, and Sentry punches him up and then flies
the hell out of
him to hit him again. He sees Ghost phasing around him, and then No Look grabs her throat, and for a second I thought he was gonna go Omni-Man on her. Then I remembered that he's just pulling his punches to try not to kill them. He catches Bucky's punch and then superheats the arm and yanks it off. The Thunderbolts retreat, but Bob holds back. The Thunderbolts regroup outside on the sidewalk. Yelena in particular insults the others, saying, "I suck, I'm terrible, we're all terrible." And in this moment, there's an extra as a New Yorker passing her on the sidewalk and gives her the funniest look, like extra of the year right here. Bob argues with Val on whether he should take orders from her, since if he's more powerful than the Avengers and they include a god, referring to Thor, then that makes him a god as well. This isn't really Bob talking, it's the Void. So that is what is choking Val.
Yeah,
so
he was tweaking.
the kill switch. As they leave though, the shadows of the floor absorb into his body and he turns dark and boom. Tiny white eyes. I love this visual choice because it does remind us of how the Void's eyes look in certain comics, but adapted on screen and live action, I love the choice to make his eye holes just tiny little pinpricks. Like the Void, it doesn't want to emit any light whatsoever. And I'm reminded of the 1990 film Ghost, when those rotoscope shadow demons would just show up to drag souls to hell, how they would have eyes for just a few frames and discernible faces with tiny little eye holes of light. Also, director of the Annabelle sequels and Shazam movies, David F. Sandberg uses this technique in his horror work, notably in his feature version version of Lights Out. You see this a lot in creepypasta art because it plays on two innate visual fears: a shadowy shape and our anxiety over the unknown, and our paranoia over being watched by something we can't really make out, like seeing a predator's eyes reflecting back to us from the darkness. Florence Pugh pours her heart into Yelena's confession to Alexei, how she feels so alone, how she's lost her sister, her father, and how she has so many things she feels shame over. And then, like John Walker's doom scrolling with his phone, we hear another example of how these things are psychologically killing us. Yelena says, all I do is sit and look at my phone and think about all the terrible things that I've done, and then I go to work and I drink and I go home to no one, and I sit and I think about all the terrible things that I've done again. And she needs Alexei to cut off this spiral.
Like my life.
Isn't that the death spiral we often find ourselves in? It's a kind of emotional hard truth and specificity that we don't normally hear in Marvel movies, and I loved this moment. Alexei reassures her that she was a light that could brighten any room, and that as a kid, she wanted to be the goalie on the Thunderbolts soccer team so that she could be the one everyone relies on when they make mistakes. Yes, even Poopy Pants Mandy. Now, the way Dark Sentry
she just like me for real
is very unsettling. It really just starts with people behind Yelena in the background of the previous scene, just frozen, looking up. And as more and more civilians do the same, we see his dark silhouetted form just floating silently, waiting for people to realize he's there.
He is so overpowered, dog.
We hear the Void say, "Are you tired of fighting? Here, let me help you." Like he sincerely believes that he is freeing them from their pain. And I love how they manipulate Louis Pullman's voice for this, like we're hearing two versions of his voice layered on top of each other.
Look what you unleashed.
And when he voices people, he flattens them into a shadow. So director Jake Schreier confirmed to Collider's Perry Nemiroff that the look of this first shadow was inspired by the blast shadows from victims of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
That definitely came from images from Hiroshima and those kind of shadows.
Actually, he went into some really cool detail of how they were able to get this effect to look so great.
It's a frame and a half of animation between when they disappear and when they become a shadow, and anything longer than that starts to feel like you're getting into kind of CG vapor territory. So it has to be quick. You almost feel exposed because it seems so simple. And then there's other things about it where, like, because it doesn't happen so often in the movie, like the camera needs to be more or less in line, almost like an eclipse, like with where the voiding is happening and where the shadow goes, that if you look at it from a profile perspective, it doesn't really work because it's such a short effect.
I love to hear Schreier talking through this. And thank you, Perry, for asking about
that
this.
Was a good effect,
you can see this creative thought playing out on screen. And it's why the voiding is so scary. Because it happens fast. 1.5 frames exactly, with little warning, and because it happens toward us or away from us, never in profile, it's like we are witnessing an eclipse and light is being denied to us, and we feel like it's both an innate terror of being draped in shadow and the extensions of the Void's fingers reaching out toward you. Holt and his helicopter pilot are among the first to get voided, resulting in a crash into the scaffolding and raining debris, so the Thunderbolts stray into action. Yelena sees a crashing truck and calls "Dad!" and she jumps to Alexei, who springboard launches her toward the truck to save someone. This is the same move her sister Natasha did with Alexei's American counterpart Steve Rogers in this same location in the Battle of New York in the 2012 Avengers film, and I loved seeing this awesome assist coming back. The truck hits a news van, sending it rolling into two more people, and Bucky jumps in using his arm to bounce the truck out of harm's way, and when the second helicopter crashes, Ghost phases in to push a guy out of the way, phasing out to let the fiery wreckage move through her. And as one huge piece of rubble crushes a woman, John redeems his selfish move in the elevator shaft earlier when he freed the pressure against his back to now be the one hero using that same back to push against the rubble, despite not being able to hold it alone. And now the other Thunderbolts come to his aid. And the applause
he should be strong enough to actually push that slab rock.
The people around are just happy to see them working together on something. Like they are just inspired to see heroes cooperating in addition to just saving people. Val clocks this, and you can see her already getting ideas here. Alexei saves a little girl in overalls, which must feel like a big win for a girl dad like him, but then immediately, poof, voided. Them kids. The voids.
Kill it immediately, though.
Even ones fleeing away
that caught me off guard.
Shadows spread and join together in a collective darkness. Yep.
This nigga literally was killing children, dog, and he did not care. He did not care.
Elena walks toward this darkness, instinctively knowing that she has to join Bob in this darkness in order to help him. While everyone else was trying to attack Bob, she was always the one trying to save him. Yelena again wakes up in the void, of her memory of getting Anya killed. But now she runs into a wall of a painted backdrop. This is a literal room, an enclosed set, like the Truman Show, a presentation of a reality, one that you were meant to loop through and not escape. This choice is something Jake Schreier credited to production designer Grace Yoon, who worked with him on Beef and the horror film Hereditary, and wanted the surreal elements of this movie to feel practical. It's supposed to feel like a set, not an actual forest, because it's not a reality. It's the way that your mind records it as like a movie. But Yelena smashes through the set wall into another memory that's oriented 90 degrees to the forest, and when she looks back through the hole, she sees the forest through it, and young Yelena, Anya, and that man are all staring at her, which is very creepy. But the fact that this new room feels practically linked to the forest room is something that also might seem familiar from Eternal Sunshine in the Spotless Mind, where director Michel Gondry and writer Charlie Kaufman designed a memoryscape where disconnected rooms were physically connected and transitioned through using lighting shifts. Now Yelena finds herself in another shame room, a red room memory of the girls having to rapidly assemble guns. Yelena wins and gets to stand aside and watch while
everybody else get whipped.
The slower girls. Adult
PTSD. I remember my days back in slavery, dog. This woman literally take the don't mind what I say just now. This woman literally take the girls, tell them to put their hand on the table and whip them all. She whipped their hands, dog.
Yelena holds her younger self to block her from seeing this, but then Yelena sees Bob in his attic through the mirror, but when she crashes through it, she just sees another version of herself leaning against a bathtub, drunk and passed out. This alternate self jump scares, grabbing her arm and then forcing her to drink too. Yelena looks through another mirror and sees Bob, and we get this really cool practical transition done mostly just through lighting and shifting set walls into Bob's attic. We should also remember that this isn't the first time Yelena has looked through a bathroom mirror above a sink and experienced a surreal transition. Hawkeye showed Yelena's blipping from Thanos' snap from her point of view as she looked into the bathroom mirror and she dusted out of and then back into reality 5 years later as that bathroom decor shifted around her. So Yelena is really destined to be the person to make this metaphysical journey. Yelena finds Bob dressed in his childhood clothes, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube as he witnesses his father abusing his mom downstairs. Yelena changes her earlier advice, saying that we can't just stuff this stuff down and bury our darkness, that it has to be something that we work through together. And she tells Bob that she knows this is possible because she has already felt this lighter burden just by being with him. The void makes the attic start attacking them both. The walls bend around Yelena like the effect in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, and the curtain chokes them. The others arrive, Ghost slices the curtain, Bucky and John punch away debris, and Alexei just pointlessly rips a pillow open. We don't see what the shame rooms looked like for the other characters like Alexei, Ava, or Bucky. Bucky just jokes that he's had a great past, so it went great. We saw quite a few of his shame flashbacks in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier as he went on his apology tour, but I assume the 1991 killing of Tony Stark's parents were one of those rooms for him. Meanwhile, outside, the void takes over the whole city. We see a workplace where the shadow voids the onlookers, but also drapes down over the light fixtures and blacks out the computer screens. In a wide shot, the shadow starts to work its way up Freedom Tower.
This nigga engulfed the whole New York City.
Maybe it's just too.
He engulfed the whole New York City, right? With Spider-Man in it. There was no sight of Spider-Man. Spider-Man on vacation, or just say it ain't his business.
In any way. Back in the void, John bashes Bob's abusive dad in the face, and they fall down to an outdoor street corner with an obviously painted backdrop. And I love this effect, especially since we learned that Bob is remembering this as being high on meth at the time. This is a memory Bob hinted at earlier when he was addicted to meth and working as a spinny sign chicken for, we see on the sign, Alfredo's bail bonds. Bucky knocks out this chicken, and then they loop back to the Malaysian lab where this all began for Bob. Bob says that he was looking for more drugs in Southeast Asia until some guy approached him for medical study, which ended up being Ox experimenting on addicts like him. And it works for Bob, releasing the void. And the void now appears, restraining the others as he taunts Bob into attacking him. They fight, and the void initially knocks him down and says, "We will always be alone." We see the others stretch away from Bob, but Bob tackles the void, punching him, and the void laughs, and in addition to his eyes, we can now make out pale white teeth. Ugh. Fighting the void like this is only helping the darkness spread into Bob's body, so Yelena breaks free and leaps over to Bob to hold him back. The others join in a group hug, and now we see why Jake Schreier compared this to Toy Story 3. The refusal to fight the void is what repels the darkness. They need to physically hold each other to keep that darkness away. So the void releases its flushes from them and from the whole city.
They can't literally beat the void.
Little girl in overalls. But we have to ask, what kind of shame room did that girl go down into? Did she poop her pants during a soccer game? Afterwards, Bob has no memory of what they just went through, so his memory blackouts are still affecting him. The void is not gone. He's not fully healed. And I like this because that's just really how depression works. You know, unfortunately, you never fully get rid of the darkness. You just learn how to manage it. And now he just knows how to keep the void from taking over completely. The answer is just be friends with Yelena. Like, the movie does not answer where the darkness comes from, but it does teach us how to manage that darkness, to face it head on and not over aggressively fight it, but just really know that you're always going to have it, but you're never fully alone, because that darkness is something we all experience. So is Sentry okay? We're gonna talk about that in this.
There was no way they could have beat the Sentry or the Void, so they had to handle it that way. He literally had to beat it himself.
Weekend's episode of the Sneak Peek. And actually, New Rockstars just launched a new 4th channel called New Rockstars Highlights, which is just going to be a clips channel. We're going to share our favorite clips from our longer podcast.
A man's power is depression,
and the soon to be returning,
and he is unbeatable because of it.
If you want to subscribe there, you can. Thank you. So they step up to Val to arrest her, but Val leads them through a barrier where we realize she tricked them into a press conference. Marvel ending their films and press conferences is just a device Kevin Feige loves to do to signal to us that this movie is the arrival of someone important, like Tony Stark at the end of Iron Man, Peter Parker at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, T'Challa at the UN in the mid-credits scene of Black Panther, and now these new Avengers. I like how one of the microphones on the podium is WHIH, the MCU in-universe news service. So you know this is official. Yelena leans over to Val to say, "We own you now," and we end the film back in a close-up of Yelena taking a breath of relief as Alan Silvestri's Avengers theme plays over the score. Now, in yesterday's Ending Explain and post-credit video, I broke down the fun visuals in the closing credits designed by Perception using real-life periodicals as the new Avengers are questioned and mocked by the public and the media. One with the group rendered as Queen in a Bohemian Rhapsody pose on Rolling Stone. We see a version of Washington crossing the Delaware with the guinea pig on the bow. We see David Harbour referencing his own DC character in Creature Commandos Frankenstein as he hands a flower to the little girl he saved. Really, these final minutes work so well because, according to Jake Schreier, Kevin Feige knew that skeptical audiences might kind of roll their eyes at this lineup being called the New Avengers by Val, so they get ahead of that cynicism by mocking the New Avengers with these jokey media headlines and images, so that by the end of the sequence, we in the audience start to defend this lineup of goofballs from the snarky, cynical media. And when the Thunderbolts asterisk is torn away to the New Avengers title logo, we all cheer. And that takes us right into 2 great post-credit scenes, the second of which was directed by the Russo brothers and seamlessly assimilates the New Avengers into the same MCU of Avengers Doomsday as they become the welcome party to the Fantastic Four. So while overall the Thunderbolts film was an emotionally heavy exploration of mental health that got a lot of great character moments and laughs along the way, it does end with this additional layer of a familiar Avengers level crisis. And a few final details in the post-credit scene: the red star on Bucky's sleeve, in addition to recalling his red star on his original Winter Soldier arm, also has the segmented form of the star that we see on Sam Wilson's Captain America shield, which is just a nice detail. Also, the sponsors on Alexi's New Avengers tracksuit are all real-life brands who have done product integrations with Marvel Studios. You may remember Peloton as the product placement when President Ross was working out on Air Force One in Brave New World, and you gotta remember the crazy Tide commercials for that movie.
Xbox.
And the book that Bob is reading is Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, A Way of Being, which shows that Bob is working on his mental health in whatever proactive way he can. I hope Bucky doesn't let this guy read Kierkegaard. It'll just bum him out and give him some wrong ideas about moral philosophy. And Yelena mentioning that they weren't looped in on the space crisis suggests that Nick Fury, head of Saber, might be giving his intel to Sam's Avengers, which I assume Carol Danvers is a part of. But I went into everything with the New Avengers and the Fantastic Four and Doomsday in yesterday's video, so go check that out.
We're gonna hop in that video next.
This movie. Comment down below with your thoughts and your favorite detail from this breakdown. And a special thanks to our YouTube members: Frederick Price, Jeremy Dunham, TDS on a Quest, Cameron, Marissa Miranda, Rick Denman, Smokey DeBear, and Sin City Monster, who all support us on the executive producer level. You can support us by hitting that join button down below. Follow me at EA Boss. Subscribe to all 4 channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
All right. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next one. Post-credit scene breakdown.